So if you think about modern neonatal wards, they actually have a very specific protocol for infants born with severe jaundice.
Right, because their livers just aren't fully developed yet.
Exactly. And that means this toxic byproduct, bilirubin, starts building up in their blood, which can threaten severe neurological
Yeah,
damage.
it's a huge risk for newborns.
But the wild thing is, doctors don't just rely on complex drugs or surgery to fix it. They literally strip the infant down, put them in an incubator, and just bathe them in intense, highly calibrated blue light.
Which is incredible to see in practice.
It really is.
Huh?
The light waves physically penetrate the infant's skin right down to the capillary beds, and they photoisomerize the bilirubin.
Meaning it essentially changes the molecule's shape.
Right. It changes the shape so the body can easily flush it out in water.
So the light itself is doing the heavy metabolic lifting that the human organ just can't do yet.
Exactly. So I want you to keep that image in mind for a second. Now, look at the light that is currently illuminating whatever space you are sitting in right now.
Probably a screen or an LED bulb.
Yeah, probably. It is so easy for us to view ambient light as just a physical utility, like the backdrop that allows our retinas to map the environment so we don't trip over a chair.
Right, just a tool for vision.
But our sources today completely dismantle that passive view. We are jumping into a deep dive on the profound biological, psychological, and clinical impacts of light.
And the science here is just fascinating.
Oh, it's mind-blowing. The mission today is to really explore the mechanisms of how photons act as a direct biological catalyst, like how they manipulate our neurochemistry, dictate our emotional regulation, and even function as a highly targeted medical instrument.
I mean, light is basically the ultimate puppet master of human behavior.
For sure. Whether you are struggling to get a good night's sleep, trying to boost your focus at work, or just, insanely curious about how the world works, mastering your light environment is the ultimate life hack.
Absolutely.
So, okay, let's unpack this. A lot of our listeners are already familiar with the basic concept of the circadian rhythm. We know we have a 24-hour internal clock. But looking at the sources, the mechanism of how light actually syncs that clock goes far beyond just light makes us wake up.
Oh, totally. It requires looking at the specific neuroanatomy.
Yeah.
The master clock you're talking about is a cluster of thousands of neurons in the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or the SCN for short.
Okay, the SCN.
Yeah. The SCN is essentially the conductor of the body's orchestra, but it sits in total darkness inside the skull. So it relies entirely on a dedicated pathway from the eyes.
Right.
But what is really fascinating is that the eyes aren't just using the standard rods and cones we use for vision to send this signal.
Wait, so it's not the same cells we used to see?
No, not at all. We have a distinct subset of cells in the retina called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, or IPRGCs.
So these are the cells specifically hunting for daytime light, rather than just, processing visual shapes and colors.
Precisely. And they contain a photopigment called melanopsin. Melanopsin is highly sensitive to a very specific slice of the visible light spectrum.
Through light, right.
Yes. Short wavelength blue light, peaking right around 480 nanometers. When that specific wavelength hits your eye, the IPRGCs fire signals straight down the retinohypothalamic tract right into the SCN.
Wow.
This is the biological trigger. The SCN then sends signals to the pineal gland to immediately halt the secretion of melatonin, which is the sleep-promoting hormone.
So it shuts down the sleep system.
Right. And simultaneously, it triggers the adrenal glands to release a spike of cortisol that elevates your core body temperature and blood pressure, snapping you into physiological alertness.
It's essentially a mandatory software update for the brain. Like in computer science, distributed systems rely on a central server sending out a sync pulse so all the localized clocks match up.
Oh, that is a great analogy.
Thanks. The morning sunlight hitting the melanopsin is the sync pulse that aligns the peripheral clocks in our liver, our gut, and our muscle tissue with the master clock in the brain. But, this raises an interesting challenge. If our entire endocrine system and this master clock are completely slave to the solar cycle, how do we explain human populations living in extreme environments?
Where?
Take people in Barrow, Alaska, living way up above the Arctic Circle. They endure roughly 60 days of total darkness in the winter.
Oh, right.
Why doesn't their endocrine system completely collapse without that daily blue light sync pulse?
Well, that is a phenomenal stress test of the system. In those extreme populations, we actually observe something called circadian drift.
Circadian drift?
Yeah. Without that strong daily sodic reset from the sun, their melatonin production flattens out. So instead of a sharp peak at night and a sharp drop in the morning, it becomes this rolling, sluggish curve.
Ah, so it's not a clean on and off switch anymore.
Exactly. And this leads to profound physiological changes. We see higher rates of metabolic lethargy, fragmented sleep architecture, and even compromised immune responses.
Wow. But they survive, so how are they keeping time?
The reason they don't completely collapse is that the human body eventually relies on secondary, far less potent cues to keep time. These are known as Zeitgebers, things like strict meal timing, social interaction, and temperature changes.
Okay, so backups.
Right, backups.
Yeah?
But make no mistake, without the primary photon signal from the sun, the biological system is basically running in degraded mode.
Which perfectly illustrates why modern society is largely operating in a degraded mode right now. We've totally inverted our exposure.
We really have.
I mean, we spend our days indoors, starved of the 100,000 lux intensity of natural sunlight, receiving maybe, 300 lux from ceiling fixtures?
If we're lucky.
Right. But then at 11 p.m., we stare into these screens, emitting that exact 480 nanometer blue light that triggers the melanopsin. We are artificially firing that morning synchronization pulse at midnight.
And the downstream effects of that are severe. We aren't just talking about feeling a bit groggy the next day. Chronic circadian misalignment fundamentally alters your metabolism.
Like,
Well, we see a reduction in insulin sensitivity, meaning the body really struggles to process glucose effectively. And beyond the circadian disruption, we have to consider light as a literal physical necessity for systemic health, totally independent of the clock.
you're talking about vitamin D.
Exactly. Ultraviolet B radiation from sunlight interacting with the skin is the primary mechanism for vitamin D synthesis.
The UVB photons literally break the chemical bonds in a cholesterol derivative in our skin, right? And that converts it into pre-vitamin D3.
Yes, and that pre-vitamin D3 is then processed by the liver and kidneys into the active hormone our bodies use. Without that synthesis, the skeletal system suffers because calcium absorption just plummets.
Wait, so if light is a literal nutrient and we need the sun to synthesize vitamins, are we basically just complicated walking houseplants?
I love that. I mean, what's fascinating here is that, yeah, we kind of are. Our biology is perfectly tethered to the solar cycle. And when we lack daytime light but overdoses on artificial nightlight, we completely break our ancient biological machinery.
And the sources point out this huge immune factor, too.
Right, absolutely. There is a strong inverse correlation between adequate solar exposure and the prevalence of certain autoimmune conditions.
Right, like the further you move from the equator and the less annual UVB exposure a population gets, the higher the rates of conditions like multiple sclerosis and rheumatoid arthritis.
Yes, the immune system absolutely requires this hormonally active form of vitamin D to regulate T cell function. It basically prevents the body from attacking its own tissues.
So because light fundamentally dictates this complex neurochemical balance, driving cortisol, regulating melatonin, synthesizing vital hormones, it operates as a direct chemical lever on the brain.
Which naturally bridges us into the psychological data.
Right, because if photons are physically altering the limbic system, it's not just a timekeeper, it is actively manipulating our emotional regulation.
Exactly. The sources point out that bright light exposure demonstrably lowers cortisol over the course of a day and facilitates the synthesis of serotonin.
So it literally creates a more positive, energetic, emotional baseline.
Yeah. And dim environments, conversely, foster quiet introspection. But prolonged deprivation of natural light leads to sluggishness and increased anxiety.
And the spatial psychology data reflects this perfectly. Spaces with ample light make people feel safe, open, and more social. It signals visibility to the primal brain.
Right. And poorly lit or severely dim spaces often trigger a mild subconscious threat response. People become socially reserved, voices drop, and isolation increases.
So what does this all mean? I have to push back a little bit on the simplicity of that premise.
Okay, go ahead.
It sounds like we're saying bright light equals happy and safe, and dim light equals sad and anxious. But if I am intensely stressed and overstimulated at my desk, my brain isn't craving a 10,000 lux floodlight. Are we really claiming we can hack human emotion just by turning the brightness up?
Well, this raises an important question because that is a crucial distinction to make. It is not a linear equation of more light equating to a better mood.
Right, because that would be too simple.
Exactly. The mechanism relies entirely on biological appropriateness and contrast. If your limbic system is already overstimulated, dumping more high-intensity light into the visual cortex just exacerbates the stress response.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
The eye has to constantly micro-adjust, and the brain processes that glare as environmental noise.
Right. The psychological benefit comes from matching the spectral composition and intensity of the light to the specific cognitive demand of the moment.
Which is heavily supported by the occupational data we reviewed from NIOSH and the CDC.
Yes, their data is incredibly telling.
They isolate how poorly calibrated lighting, specifically severe glare, harsh shadowing, and imperceptible flickering, creates measurable physiological strain.
Let's look at the mechanics of that strain for a second. If a worker in a manufacturing plant, or say a clinic, is operating under harsh, flickering fluorescent lighting, their ciliary muscles are constantly engaging and disengaging.
Those are the muscles controlling the lens of the eye, right?
Yes, they are trying to adapt to the microfluctuations in brightness. Simultaneously, the brain is struggling to process the visual field through harsh shadows.
And that leads to what they call saccadic overcorrection, where the eye rapidly darts around trying to lock onto visual targets.
Exactly. And the result of all that constant adjusting is profound visual fatigue, tension headaches, and a measurable drop in cognitive accuracy.
Which is huge. I mean, a millimeter error in a machine shop or a surgical theater isn't just an accident. It is often the direct result of this microscopic visual delay.
And that data translates to shift work as well. If a dispatcher or a nurse is working a night shift, flooding their environment with intense cool white light at 3 a.m. might temporarily boost alertness by forcing cortisol production.
Right, trying to trick the brain.
But because that light violently clashes with their intrinsic circadian rhythm, it induces severe irritability and degrades emotional control.
Wow.
And the following day, their recovery sleep architecture is shattered, leading to a compounding cognitive deficit.
Recognizing that timing, contrast, and spectrum are the actual levers of cognitive control is a massive paradigm shift. It means we don't just have to passively accept whatever light bulb happens to be screwed into the ceiling.
Exactly. We can actively architect the environment to elicit specific physiological responses.
And the architectural specifications for doing this are super well documented in the sources. For environments demanding focus, analytical thought, and high cognitive load like a home office or a study space, the standard is neutral to cool white light.
Right. On the Kelvin temperature scale, this sits between 4,000 K and 5,000 K. And it's enriched with that blue wavelength spectrum we discussed earlier.
And the intensity target is usually around 500 to 750 lux, right?
Correct. That specific combination of color, temperature, and intensity suppresses daytime melatonin and keeps the visual cortex sharply engaged.
Without inducing that ciliary muscle strain we just detailed. And you want to utilize directional lighting, maybe bounce it off walls or ceilings to minimize direct glare on reflective screens.
Yes, that's best practice.
Here's where it gets really interesting for practical application. We can basically view that 4000K cool light as a biological stimulant. It is essentially a shot of physiological espresso.
Oh, that is a perfect way to describe it.
It forces the system to boot up. But just as you wouldn't consume high doses of caffeine at 9 p.m., you cannot subject your retinas to that spectrum in the evening if you expect your architecture of sleep to remain intact.
The transition protocol is critical. In rest environments, like your living room or bedroom, the specifications completely invert. You need to shift down to a warm yellow light, around 2700K to 3000K.
So it visually resembles the glow of a wood fire or sunset, like a cozy, heavy blanket for your brain.
Yes, it effectively removes the 480 nanometer sync pulse from the environment. Because this warmer spectrum contains very little blue light, the IPRGCs in the retina do not react to it.
So the SCN is finally allowed to register the onset of biological night.
Exactly, permitting the pineal gland to begin the slow, necessary secretion of melatonin. And the spatial psychology shifts as well. The lower lux intensity reduces environmental noise, signaling the limbic system to downregulate the stress response.
So using blue light filters or switching to warm, low-level lighting an hour before sleep is not just some trendy wellness hack. It is basic biological hygiene.
Completely.
And the clinical sector is already operationalizing this on a massive scale through human-centric lighting or HCL in modern hospitals.
I could geek out over HCL all day. The data is incredible.
Instead of static buzzing fluorescence, patient rooms are equipped with dynamic LED systems that algorithmically track the solar cycle outside.
And the implications for patient recovery are staggering. Historically, the constant ambient lighting of intensive care units resulted in patients developing ICU delirium.
Right, that state of severe confusion.
Yeah, and delayed healing, directly tied to complete circadian obliteration. By installing HCL systems, the hospital artificially enforces a robust circadian rhythm.
So during the day, the room is flooded with high-intensity, blue-enriched daylight to stimulate wakefulness.
And in the evening, the system automatically dials down to a dim 2700K amber glow.
And because we know the immune system is deeply tethered to sleep architecture, enforcing that rhythm has measurable outcomes. When patients achieve deep, slow-wave sleep unhindered by artificial blue light, their bodies can properly regulate inflammatory cytokines.
They physically heal faster because their biological clock is anchored. It represents a total shift from viewing light as mere illumination to viewing it as an active medical intervention.
Which brings us to the final threshold in our sources. Because if ambient, carefully timed light can regulate systemic healing, what happens when we drastically concentrate the power and specificity of those photons?
Right, moving away from environmental engineering and into the realm of light as a targeted, localized medical instrument, phototherapy and laser medicine.
Exactly. And these aren't just gadgets you buy online. These are highly calibrated, specific treatments utilized by institutions like the NHS and the Mayo Clinic.
It requires separating the concept of general sunlight from the isolation of extremely specific wavelengths for targeted cellular outcomes, like the treatment protocols for severe psoriasis.
Oh, right. Narrowband UVB therapy.
Yes. Dermatologists utilize this for autoimmune skin conditions. Psoriasis involves an overactive immune response causing skin cells to multiply at a hyperaccelerated rate, creating painful plaques.
So rather than using broad-spectrum UV, which carries high skin cancer risks, clinicians isolate the exact wavelength of 311 nanometers.
Exactly, 311.
Right.
At this specific frequency, the light penetrates the epidermis and induces apoptosis-programmed cell death in the specific overactive T cells causing the inflammation.
So it effectively halts the disease process locally without suppressing the patient's entire immune system. It's a surgical strike using photons instead of a scalpel.
It really is. And the sources detail an even more complex mechanism in photodynamic therapy, or PDT.
PDT is a fascinating convergence of pharmacology and physics. Basically, a patient is administered a photosensitizing agent, a specific drug that gets absorbed by the body.
Right, and these drugs naturally concentrate at higher levels in abnormal or hyperproliferative cells, like precancerous lesions or specific types of skin cancer.
But wait, the drug itself is completely inert, right? It does nothing on its own.
Correct. It lies totally dormant in the tissue. The clinician then exposes the targeted tissue to a specific wavelength of light, often red or blue, depending on the drug and the depth required.
And then what happens?
When the photons hit the molecules of the photosensitizing agent, it triggers a localized chemical reaction, generating highly reactive oxygen species.
Wow.
These oxygen molecules instantly destroy the abnormal cells from the inside out, while leaving the surrounding healthy tissue that hasn't absorbed the drug completely untouched.
So the light acts as the detonation signal.
Exactly.
But of course, the apex of artificially concentrated light is the laser, light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation.
Right. We see surgical lasers used in operating rooms to slice through tissue with microscopic precision, while the thermal energy instantly coagulates the blood vessels.
Resulting in virtually bloodless incisions. And we see excimer lasers in ophthalmology, like LASIK, reshaping the curvature of the human cornea in minutes to correct refractive errors.
The density of energy in those applications is designed to cut, ablate, and vaporize. But the sources highlight a rapidly expanding, almost counterintuitive application: low-level laser therapy, or LLLT.
Okay, this is where I struggled the most with the mechanisms in the literature. LLLT is being used clinically to treat chronic, non-healing wounds, severe joint inflammation, and osteoarthritis.
Yes, it is incredible.
But wait, so we are literally shooting low-level lasers at damaged human tissue, and instead of burning the tissue, it makes them heal. That sounds like pure science fiction. How does a laser heal a wound?
Right, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it all comes down to a process called photobiomodulation. The lasers used in LLLT operate in the red and near-infrared spectrum, usually between 600 and 1,000 nanometers. These specific wavelengths have the unique ability to pass through the skin barrier and penetrate deeply into soft tissue and joints without generating destructive thermal heat.
So they don't burn you.
No. When these specific photons reach the cells in the damaged tissue, they are absorbed by a specific enzyme in the mitochondria called cytochrome C oxidase.
And the mitochondria are the engine of the cell responsible for generating cellular energy.
Yes, and the energy currency they produce is adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. When cytochrome C oxidase absorbs the near-infrared photons, it accelerates the electron transport chain, resulting in a massive upregulation of ATP production.
So by firing the laser into the damaged tissue, you are effectively giving the struggling cells an enormous injection of metabolic energy.
Exactly. The cells use this surplus energy to rapidly accelerate tissue repair, clear out inflammatory markers, and stimulate localized blood flow.
So the photon isn't doing the healing, it is providing the raw metabolic fuel for the cell to heal itself at an accelerated rate.
Precisely. Though it is important to emphasize that this requires exact clinical dosimetry. The power density, the wavelength, and the duration of exposure must be meticulously calculated by a clinician to target the specific depth of the damaged tissue.
So you can't just buy a glowing wand on the internet and expect it to work.
No, absolutely not. That separates true photobiomodulation from the myriad of low-powered consumer LED devices marketed online, which frequently lack the necessary irradiance to penetrate beyond the superficial layers of the skin. They completely fail to stimulate the mitochondria at all.
That makes total sense. So, to synthesize the massive ground we've covered from our sources today, the way we interact with light needs a fundamental update.
It really does.
Light is not just a passive utility to prevent us from stumbling in the dark. It is a potent biological regulator that hardwires our internal clocks via those specialized receptors in our eyes.
It is a psychological manipulator that dictates our cortisol and serotonin levels, profoundly altering our social behavior and cognitive focus.
And through intentional architectural design, we can leverage specific color temperatures and lux intensities to actively engineer our productivity and rest.
Not to mention the frontier of clinical science, where isolated wavelengths are being deployed to photoisomerize toxins, trigger targeted cell death in precancerous tissue, and fuel mitochondrial regeneration in chronic wounds.
If there is a highly practical golden rule to extract from the complexities of all this photobiology, it is remarkably straightforward. Bright and blue enriched by day to anchor the biology, dim and red shifted by night to protect the recovery.
It is an ancient environmental rhythm that our modern infrastructure has almost entirely dismantled.
So, to you listening right now, take inventory of the light diet you were feeding your retinas today. Did you secure that crucial 15 to 20 minutes of high-intensity morning sunlight to send the synchronization pulse to your master cog?
It's so important.
As you sit at your workspace, are you fighting ciliary muscle strain from harsh, glaring overheads? And tonight, are you going to change the bulbs in your bedroom? Will you actively remove the 480 nanometer blue light from your environment, or will you allow a glowing screen to artificially trick your brain into thinking it is noon?
And as you assess your own light environment, consider the broader trajectory of our species.
Yeah.
The intricate biological machinery we've discussed, the IPRGCs, the suppression of melatonin, the synthesis of vitamin D. It was all refined over millions of years of strict adherence to the rising and setting of the sun.
Yeah.
But in the span of just over a century, we have migrated indoors and bathed ourselves in a permanent artificial daytime of LEDs and screens. The human genome is incredibly adaptable, but the mechanisms of the circadian rhythm are ancient and deeply rigid.
So where does that leave us?
The question the clinical data leaves us with is this: are we currently experiencing a temporary, painful friction as our biology slowly adapts to this new endless daylight? Or is our physiology fundamentally incapable of separating from the solar cycle, meaning we will forever be fighting a losing battle, treating the downstream diseases of a species living out of sync with its own clock?